Okay, so we're back with our last part of lesson 1, and we're gonna do a blocking and non-blocking example. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to create a couple simple text files, 2 lists of different lengths. So let's go ahead, let's create 2 new files. Now I don't have the option for text files, so I'm just gonna choose new file. And we'll call this first one, we'll call it food.txt. All right. What have you eaten today? Let's put a few things in this list.
Coffee sandwich, turkey, bacon.
Okay. Let's put about 10 things in here. Okay. Well, we'll do a separate file for drinks. Just do food for now. Asim, what'd you have for lunch? A fish sandwich? Okay. Priyank, what'd you have for lunch today? And Minder? Lunch today? Fruit? Okay, fruit, salad, soup. All right, that's good. As long as we've got 10 items in the list. Yep. Well, you can make your own. Your list doesn't, the items in the list don't matter. You want to make your own list? Go for it. Doesn't have to match this list. But let's put about 10 items in it. I'll put in 11. My kids asked me to stop and get sushi tonight. People do sushi. Okay, so there's our list. Make sure you've got 10 or 12 items in the list. Doesn't really matter what they are. Then let's make a second text file, which is going to be drinks.txt. And let's put fewer items in this one, maybe 4 or 5 items only in the drinks list. Okay. So I'll make one other text file, call it drinks. What have you had to drink today? Okay. All right, that's good. We'll keep this list short. So deliberately, I want to make them different lengths. So we've got food and we've got drinks. Okay. So first, we're going to write a synchronous or blocking version of a node file that will read and print out the contents of these 2 files. Then we're going to do a non-blocking version of the same thing. So let's make a new JavaScript file. We'll call this one blocking. Okay. Now, we don't need the HTTP library. This will just be something we run from the command line, so we don't need to reference the HTTP, but we do need to reference one of the other node modules in order to read files on the file system. So we're going to link to the file system module. So again, this gets installed when you install Node. I'll create a variable, and that module is called FS, which stands for file system. So the FS library, it has functions for reading files as well as writing to files. And the read file, there's 2 versions. There's a synchronous version of reading a file, and there's an asynchronous version. So this file is going to use our synchronous functions. So let's do this. So the first thing we want to do is print out a heading in the console that says food. Then we want to open up and read the contents of our food file and print out the contents to the console as well. So we're going to do this synchronously using blocking code. We're going to call fs read file. We're going to provide two parameters. First one is, what file are we reading? Food.txt. And the second parameter, when we call read files, we have to specify the encoding type, which is just UTF-8. Whoops. And I want to assign this to a variable. So the content of the file will get stored in a variable called food. That'll have our list of 11 or 12 items. And now we just want to print that out. Our food variable is filled. And instead of calling read file, I used the wrong function. We're going to call read file sync. That's our synchronous or blocking version. So when we call read file sync, nothing else happens until we're done reading all the contents of that file. Now we want to do the exact same thing with the drinks. So first we print the food heading, we read and print the list of food, then we print the drinks heading, read and print the list of drinks. I also want to put the drinks heading, I want a blank line in between. So after the last food item, let's print out a blank line. I can just escape that with a \n. That'll print a new line before the word drinks. And now we're just doing the exact same thing. So print the first heading, print the first set of data. Then print the second heading, print the second set of data. So this is kind of similar to how we would do it in PHP or C#. It's going to execute and run each command one at a time. Once you've written the code, you can try this in your command prompt with the command node space blocking. And it should read the contents of those files and print out the contents along with the headings to your command prompt. Okay, so I'll run node and blocking. All right, so that's what we want, right? So this down here doesn't happen until after our entire reading of the file contents is read and printed out. Right, so this is kind of what we're used to doing. So our blocking page is done. That's the output we should get. So we're going to create one more file, which is non-blocking.js. So go ahead and create that file as well. We'll link to we'll reference the FS library again, because again, we need to read the files. So let's print the food heading. Again, console.log. Food. This time we want to read the drinks, but we want it to run asynchronously, which is the default with Node. Unless we call read file sync explicitly, our code will be asynchronous. So we'll call fs.readFile. Our first parameter is going to be the same. What file are we opening? Food.txt. Second parameter is the same, character encoding. But now we have a third parameter. This is going to be our callback parameter. So here's our callback function. And whenever we're trying to read data in Node, our callback has two parameters of its own. When we try to read a file, or maybe we're trying to run a query on the database, one of two things can happen when we try to fetch some data. What are the two possibilities? They won't both happen. What two things could happen when we try and grab some data? Right. Either we get some data. If we don't get data, what are we likely going to get instead? An error. Okay. So in Node, the error is always the first parameter. So we're either going to get an error or we're going to get back some food. One or the other. Now we need to open a set of curly braces. So open up the food file, read the contents, and then we're either going to get an error or food. So if we get food, we'll deal with the error in a minute. First, we'll assume there's no error. So we can just console log food. Right, so you'll notice this is different. In our blocking version, we had to assign the variable to our function. In the asynchronous version, this file, this function read file, if it finds data, it will automatically send that data into food here. Now, we could still assign it to a variable, but we shouldn't need to. Now let's do the same thing with our drinks, and then let's try it out and see how it behaves. So again, I'll put in my new line, a blank line before the word drinks. And then we'll write a second callback function to do the drinks. Again, we'll call read file. We want to read drinks. And maybe we'll get an error. Otherwise, we'll get a bunch of data back that we're going to put into a variable called drinks. No, this could be anything. We could call this data if you wanted. This is the result of read file. Read file will either give us an error, and I'll break it in a minute, so we'll get an error instead. If we don't get an error, this is a variable that will hold the contents of the read file function. So this function sends the data in here. Okay, so it doesn't have to be the same name as the file.
Instead of creating the function, or no, creating the variable and then doing the function and then calling the function, you're just doing kind of all.
It's all in one. You got it. Okay. So let's try non-blocking. Do you expect we're going to get the same result in the console, or are we going to get a different result? What do you think we're going to get? You think the same? What are you expecting?
Write food and then drinks gonna come, and then food is gonna come.
Okay, any other opinions? What do you think will happen? Tara, what do you think?
It's gonna write food, then drinks, then the food will come to the drinks.
Okay, let's try it. So we'll run node non-blocking. Huh.
You mash them all into once. Pizza and the food and the drinks are together now, aren't they?
Well, no, because here's our list of food, Kit Kat to sushi, and there's our list of drinks. Why does it print the drinks heading before the list of food? So line 15 wound up executing before line 11. Why? Yeah, because this process to open and read the file, read the content and print it all, it took a while to run, but because this is non-blocking, this code keeps on executing. Because this happens so much faster than this process, the drinks heading actually appears before the food items. If we wanted to, so how could we do it? What would we do if we wanted to make sure the drink heading didn't print until after the list of food was finished? There's two places we could move that command on line 15. Okay, yeah, so what line would you move it to? So we could either do it here, yep, so after the list of food is done, but before the drinks. Let's try it here and see.
The other places inside the other.
Yeah, we could also move it after we finish printing out the list of food. Both would work. So let's try that.
Actually, if your food is too long at that moment, it could be a problem. No?
Yes, if the food is too long, that won't work. So now we're getting the correct result.
So if the list is too long, that it takes long to load, that it will go on to the next
Mhm.
and you'll have the list of drinks.
Yep. If we put 1,000 more items in food, then it would be much longer. Okay, and drinks still might show up first.
It's mostly based on load time that it does that. Right?
Yep. So you can see though how this is going to help us from a performance point of view. When we're writing pages that have to do a lot of stuff in the background, maybe we need to do a whole lot of processing in the database, send emails, perform calculations, do business logic, yet we can still render stuff to the page quicker. Users don't have to wait and see a blank screen with a browser tab going like this. We can send back stuff that they need faster, because our code is going to not be non-blocking. If we want it to block, we can make it block like we did here. We want this function to be blocked. It shouldn't run until food is done. So we have control, but by default, our application is designed to be non-blocking. And that's why Node is so fast. So this structure, I guess we should handle the error. So what happens, let's say I put in the name of a file and that file name doesn't exist. You don't have to change yours to do this, but I'm just going to show you. So I run non-blocking again. It just tells me that food is undefined. Doesn't crash, it carries on, but I don't get any information about that error. So the easy way to check for an error is I can just say if error, so meaning if we got an error, let's log it out, what the error is. And then I'll just say return. If we get an error, there's no point trying to print out a list of food. We don't have a list of food. We know food is going to be empty. If we have an error, we don't have a food variable. So if I run it again, it says here's the error. No such file or directory. So we get some indication as to what's gone wrong. So that's our easy way to do error handling in Node. In our callbacks, we have that error parameter. If there's an error, it will be filled with some data. And we can just evaluate if that error exists or not. This if error, that's shorthand in English, just means if an error exists. If we have no error, then that error variable is null and our code just carries on. So I'll take that out. So if it runs with no error, just ignores that line and keeps going. We could put this in an else, but by using a return, I don't need the else. Return means stop execution in this function. Don't do anything else. Does anybody have, that was really all the code I wanted to go through with you today. Tried to ease into it slowly for you. Does anybody have any questions?
If we will use not UTF 8 instead of crushed, because will be not in UTF.
I don't know. Good question.
Seldom, but sometimes related to the use.
We'll try. I'll try that. We'll see if it accepts that. Good question, Artem. Still works.
You know what if you don't set the character encoding at all?
If I provide nothing, well, if I leave that parameter out, I don't know. Again, let's try it and see. Yeah. So that parameter is obviously required by that function. Because what it's doing is it's taking this as my encoding type. The second parameter is the character encoding, which is my callback function. So that isn't going to work. Yep.
We input .txt and just like apostles, but it is into the quotes.
You mean if I use double quotes? It's fine. Double quotes and single quotes in Node are interchangeable, but the convention is to use single quotes for strings, not double quotes. But it would work with double quotes. It won't crash. It would be okay here if I do this. So if I do it that way, that should still work fine. Still works.
What happened when you ran blocking? Did you run blocking?
Yep. So when I run blocking, we get the same result because it executes in that order. Right? We now have two versions of the same thing. But without putting this inside our callback, this was happening second when it was non-blocking, right? Both headings printed before the food ever printed.
It's all kind of doing it at once.
Even if we replace our code and drinks will be the first and food will be second, we will receive our
Good question. That's a good, so I'll drag it up and we'll see. So now drinks is first. See what happens. So notice what happens now, right? This is still inside the callback, so this actually happens first. And then read file, drinks. So it's really broken now. Right? Everything's really in the wrong order when we do it that way.
Can you use any timeout function?
Yep.
So we will specify that food will be first. And
We could use a timeout. The problem is you don't know how big of a timeout to set. Right? You're better off using a blocking function in that case rather than a timeout because we don't know how long it will be.
we cannot say that we should run this function after that function.
Well, you would use blocking function. You'd use blocking code instead if you wanted to. Like, let's say we're going to send a confirmation email after we've saved data, right? And then we're going to display a confirmation on the screen. We don't want to send an email. We want to block that process until we save the order to the database and generate an order number. Because if the order save fails, we don't want to give the customer an email saying, here's your order with no order number, right? So we have to decide whether our code needs to block or not. But by default in Node, it won't block unless you make it block. That's the important thing to note. Okay, the last thing I want to do, and then we will get out of here, is let's get this code running online. Now, three of our files, they just run at the command line, so they're not really going to work online anyway. We just print stuff to the console, but we do have the one that's actually a web page, this server.js. So we should be able to load this on Heroku. So what I want to do is create a Git repository, push my code to Git, and then we'll create a new website on Heroku, and we'll deploy from GitHub to Heroku. So I'm going to go to GitHub. So jump over to GitHub. You can use the little desktop tool if you like. If you're working in WebStorm or Visual Studio Code, you can also connect to GitHub right from there if you want. So I'll just create an empty repository here. I'll initialize Git. I'll add all my files with Git add dot. Now I need to make a commit. I'll put in my message -m as these are my end of class files. So I'm just following the code in the top left of my browser window, basically. It's added my 4 JavaScript files and my 2 text files. And now I'm just going to copy and paste those last 2 lines, adding the remote repository and pushing. So I'll just copy those 2 lines, highlight them, and copy them. And I'll right-click and paste and hit enter. And code's on GitHub. So if I open this in a new tab here, I've now got one commit, which has my files. So what I want to do now is create a new website on Heroku and deploy it from my Git repository. Again, here's your code. And you can use any way to get it on GitHub. You can use the desktop tool. You can use the built-in GitHub links that are in Visual Studio Code, in Atom, in WebStorm. Whatever you find easy. Now I'm going to sign into my Heroku account. Which takes me here. I have a bunch of apps already. I'm going to have to delete one. Because it gives us 5 free ones. So once I log into Heroku, I should get this dashboard page. I'll just click the new button, create new app. Now, if you leave it blank, Heroku will assign a name. It'll be like Black River 784. I'll just create my own, so I'll call it COMP2106 lesson 1. I'll just leave US as the region, and I'll click Create App. And they make this pretty simple. Deployment method. Notice FTP isn't even an option. They don't even give you an FTP account. These are the only ways: is use the the Heroku command line tool, use Dropbox, or use GitHub. So I'll click on GitHub. I'm logged into GitHub, so it recognizes my username. I'll type in my new repository name and search. It finds it. Click Connect. And then I have the option to enable automatic deploys. So I think you did this with Azure with Tom, right? If we enable, that means anytime we push a new commit to GitHub, it will automatically sync to Heroku and upload our changes to the web live server as well. So I'll enable that. And now the only thing I need to do is click Deploy Branch. That'll pull my code, copy of my code from GitHub. Should just take a few seconds, and then my site should be live on Heroku. So our site is so quick. Oh, no default language could be detected. Oh. So we want to set. Oh, in order to do this, we're going to need the command line tool. Okay, I think we can do this. We'll leave this for a second. I'm just going to open Heroku in a new tab. And we want the tool belt. Actually, I'll just click back on my app. If I click on deploy, it's got this Heroku Git. We may need to install. Sorry, that's not what I want. I think we'll need to install the Heroku tool belt. Okay, right. If we open a tab and go to the devcenter.heroku.com, we'll have the link here. I'm going to click on Node.js. Yep. Oh, okay. Well, that'd be easier. Let's see. So go to, I clicked on mine. So click on settings. Ah, Add build pack. Thanks, that'd be a lot easier. So the build pack we want is Node.js. Thank you. I knew there had to be an easier way. So again, I went into my site. So go back from your dashboard. If you click on your site, thank you, Priyank, and click settings and scroll down, there's an add build pack button. So I'll click that and choose Node and save changes. Now I should be able to get it from GitHub again. So I'll click deploy and I'll try the deploy branch again. This should work.
Okay.
That's interesting.
This should be, I guess, moved on the GitHub.
All right, well, I'll have to figure out what is going on. Well, it is on GitHub. Here's my project. Somehow it doesn't seem to want to know that it's Node. You would now need to clear and set. Okay, I'm going to try one more thing, and that'll be my last attempt for today. I'm going to disconnect this from GitHub and try again. Maybe we have to set the build pack first. So my build pack says Node, and I'll try and deploy from GitHub one more time. Doesn't work, we'll leave it for today and we'll come back to it next week. I'm not optimistic. Oh, that's not very helpful. Failed to detect our build pack, even though we set the build pack here.
And then the same.
Yeah. All right. So here's our site, but I don't think there's anything here. If we try our server.js.
Oh, there's no link to the GitHub or the error.
Yeah, it doesn't tell us very much, though. We might need a package.json, but we haven't talked about or looked at that yet. We'll look at that in a week or two. That may be what it's missing.
I'm looking at it right now.
Says all you do is clear the build pack and reset it.
Clear the build? Well, we can try, but
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to work. I think we do need a package.json, but I want to talk about that file before we actually go ahead and build one. All right, last attempt. But I think we need package.json to run a Node app on Heroku. I think we do. All right. Okay, we'll look at that next week. Okay, so there's no lab, nothing this week. We will have a lab next week. Okay. And like I said, I'll rejig the syllabus a little bit for next week.